Welcome to Peace, Love, Liberty Radio. Online at fppradio.com. Hey, did you know that there's a new way that you can listen to the show? You probably didn't, but there is. Have you heard of the Roku device? A lot of people have these. It's some kind of thing that you hook up to like a television, and it connects to the Wi-Fi or to your internet in some kind of way. Well, the Liberty Radio Network, which is the network that this show originates on, is now available on Roku. It's been up for about a week. There's been very little promotion of the fact that LRN is on Roku, and already over 1,200 people have added the channel to their Roku device. So if you have a Roku and you want to listen to the show because you don't necessarily want to sit there at your computer, but you want to, turn it up, well, go in the Roku, look for LRN, add the channel, then you can listen on the Roku device. So, anybody listening that way, hey, glad you found the show. So this is actually the last day of Banned Books Week. Or actually, no, you know what? Banned Books Week ended yesterday because Sunday begins a new week. But I always find Banned Books Week to be interesting. And it's one of those things that it always kind of sneaks up on me, and then 1 or 2 days into the week, it's like, oh, right, this is Banned Books Week. And then I'll start getting into some really interesting news about books that have been banned or things that have somehow stifled free expression. And there's actually a law in Arizona that is being challenged that on the surface, it sounds as though it's a good law. There's a blog post here from the ACLU that I will get into in just a moment, but I want to tell you about the lawsuit. And the blog post from the ACLU is kind of related to this. The Freedom to Read Foundation, which is an organization I had never heard of until earlier this week, joined several other organizations and bookstores in filing a lawsuit in federal court against Arizona's House Bill 2515, which makes it a felony to, quote, intentionally disclose, display, distribute, publish, advertise, or offer a photograph, videotape, film, or digital recording of another person in a state of nudity or engaged in specific sexual activities if the person knows or should have known that the depicted person has not consented to the disclosure. The bill, or the law, because it was signed, the law was targeted at revenge porn, meaning the malicious online posting of explicit photos by an aggrieved ex-lover. However, the wording of the bill or the law in Arizona is so broad that it criminalizes very innocent things, and also it criminalizes some forms of journalism. So the article from the ACLU, or the blog post rather, begins with a question. It says, which of the following could land you a felony conviction in Arizona? Now, remember, I just read you what the law criminalizes. The intentional disclosure, display, distribution, publishing, advertising, or offering of a photograph, videotape, film, digital records of another person in a state of nudity, blah, blah, blah. So which of the following do you think would land you a felony conviction in Arizona? Option A, showing images of naked prisoners tortured at Abu Ghraib. I'm sure you remember that photo, right? There was the pile of naked inmates and then somebody very proudly standing above them, pointing and laughing. There was the one picture where the guy had the hood over his head and his arms were outstretched with what appeared to be some sort of wires, and then there was the other image where there was the female member of the guard, whatever prison guard thing it was out there in Abu Ghraib, that she's pointing at some guy's genitals and laughing. So one of those pictures. Option 2 is sharing the iconic Pulitzer Prize-winning photograph of Napalm Girl, which showed an unclothed Vietnamese girl running from a napalm attack. And I'm sure you remember that photo as well, right? And I didn't know until now that that was actually a girl. I thought it was a little boy that somehow had his genitals burned off or mutilated. But it's, the naked child running down the street, running away from a napalm attack from the Vietnam War. It was really that photo that opened up the eyes of a lot of people in the U.S. about what was going on in Vietnam. So sharing that photo is option B. Option C, sharing a close-up photo of a woman's breast with a breastfeeding support group. Option D is waving a friend over to see a cute naked baby pic, like the ones on this page. And they have at the top I would say very artsy photos of infants. So which of those four, and I'll read them again without commentary. Showing images of naked prisoners tortured at Abu Ghraib. Linking to the iconic Pulitzer Prize-winning photo of Napalm Girl that showed an unclothed Vietnamese girl running from a napalm attack. Sharing a close-up photo of a woman's breast with a breastfeeding support group, or waving a friend over to see a cute naked baby photo. Unfortunately, the answer is all of the above. Could land you with a felony in Arizona. That's because the Arizona legislature recently passed a law that makes it a felony and potentially a sex offense to share images of nudity before you consent or before you get consent from every person pictured. The ACLU blog writes, it says, protecting personal privacy is without a doubt a laudable goal. Indeed, the ACLU works tirelessly to protect your private data, but Arizona's nude photo law is a seriously misguided attempt to achieve that goal. This new crime is broad and confusing. It applies to anyone who shares a nude image, not just to the bad actors who intentionally invade another person's privacy. A prosecutor need not demonstrate that a person had the expectation of privacy in an image before charging you with a crime for sharing, and the law applies equally to a private person's hacked naked photos and a beautiful nude at a photo exhibit, because the law's breadth encompasses truly newsworthy artistic and historical images. As a result, the nude photo law creates bizarre and troubling burdens on free speech, fully protected by the First Amendment. For proof that the law goes way too far and criminalizes innocent and valuable speech, you need look no further than the group of bookstores, newspapers, photographers, publishers, and librarians that have challenged the law together. Many of them belong to the stalwart First Amendment allies over at the Media Coalition, whose members include the Plaintiff Association of Publishers, Librarians, and Booksellers. Represented by the ACLU and Denton's U.S. LLP, the plaintiffs just want to be able to offer books, art, news, and history without risking a criminal conviction in Arizona. That doesn't seem like too much to ask. But there's more. Let's find out what some of the supporters of this insanity think. And then I have a list of frequently asked questions about what a bookstore or library can do to try to comply with this insanity. Stay tuned. to Peace, Love, Liberty Radio, online at fppradio.com. Now, one way that you can stay in touch with me and with the show is by joining Liberty.me. Liberty.me is a social network that, unlike Facebook, there's not, internet trolls at Liberty.me. And the reason there's not internet trolls at Liberty.me is because you have to pay for the services of Liberty.me. But it's a social network. I actually think that it's better than Facebook in a lot of ways, because not only does it allow you to post statuses and share, funny cat pictures. You can share funny cat pictures on Liberty.me if you want to. But there's also chat rooms that are built in. There are publishing sites that are built into the social network over there. So you can go check it out. Go to Liberty.me. And if you decide that you want to sign up for the services there, use the referral code FPP Radio, and it winds up saving you $5 a month for as long as you have the account. Again, that's Liberty.me. Use referral code FPP Radio. That way they know that I'm the one that sent you over to them. So I've been talking about the lawsuit in Arizona against what's being called the nude images law, and supporters of the law say that it was intended to address the harms of revenge porn, and the ACLU here defines that as a digital phenomenon typified by a scorned lover who maliciously posts private images of an ex somewhere online after or often alongside personal details. The harms of such conduct can be very real, and they predominantly impact women. There are true horror stories about women who have suffered extreme humiliation and harassment, but intimate photos sent to relatives and coworkers, or rather, they have had their intimate photos sent to their relatives and coworkers, and some have even lost jobs because of it. States can address these harms without treading on free speech if and only if those laws are tailored to addressing malicious invasions of privacy. Arizona's is not. That being that Arizona's nude images law is not tailored at only affecting revenge porn. And we, that being the ACLU, we're not going to blindly trust that the government will apply the broad law responsibly only against the quote-unquote bad guys. The photo above, and again, it's the photo of the children, the toddlers. Actually, I don't even think you could consider them toddlers. They appear to all be, like newborn to maybe 6 months in very artsy sorts of poses. But that photo explains, or rather depicts, some of the things that could wind up getting you a felony in Arizona. One of the plaintiffs in the lawsuit, the Voice Media Group, publishes the weekly Phoenix New Times. The New Times published a series of images from a local art show by Arizona artist and Arizona State University professor Betsy Snyder. One of the images from the art show is the great image documenting a month in Snyder's infant son's life. Maricopa County publicly considered opening a police investigation into the publication of these images after police requested an investigation. A Phoenix city attorney told the press that if the photos were found to be illegal, quote, everybody who picked up one of those issues of the New Time could be prosecuted for possessing child pornography. That is what can happen when law enforcement officials wield problematic laws as broadly as they're written. The First Amendment does not just permit that kind of carelessness. Laws meant to address real horrors need to do just that, without serving as a Trojan horse that could erode our hallowed free speech rights. So the Media Coalition, which is one of the groups involved in this lawsuit, has put out a list of frequently asked questions. There are 13 of these, and I think that they are all very good. Or actually, there are 14. They're all good, and I'm actually going to read all of the questions and the answers of the frequently asked questions about how bookstores and publishers and newspapers and pretty much anyone that does any kind of publishing anywhere, whether it be online, in print, etc., how they can comply with this overly broad law. The first question is, what does the law do? Seems like a very simple question. The answer is Arizona House Bill 2515 makes it a crime to publish, sell, loan, or disclose images that include nudity without the consent of the person in the picture. There is an exception to the law for pictures that depict voluntary exposure in a public setting or were taken in a commercial setting. There are also exceptions to the law for the use of images in law enforcement and in medical procedures. Who is challenging the law? 5 Arizona bookstores: Antigone Books, Bookman's, Changing Hands Bookstore, Copper News Bookstore, and Mostly Books. There's also the American Booksellers Foundation for Free Expression. Let me read that one more time. American Booksellers Foundation for Free Expression, Association of American Publishers, the Freedom to Read Foundation, the National Press Photographers Association, and Voice Media Group. Why are they challenging the law? That seems to be a very good question, and I think I kind of covered it, but let's see what the Media Coalition says. The law violates the First Amendment by criminalizing photos and videos with artistic, educational, historic, and otherwise newsworthy value, but were published or distributed without the consent of the person depicted, or consent could not be obtained. These photos are created and distributed by news photographers, produced by publishers, distributed at bookstores and libraries, and viewed by the general public. In addition to violating the First Amendment, the law will still cause a substantial chilling effect on booksellers, librarians, publishers, and photographers who will be afraid to exercise their free speech rights out of fear of being prosecuted. We believe that journalists, publishers, booksellers, and librarians should not fear going to jail for producing and distributing material protected by the Constitution. There are more questions, and we will cover those when we come back on Peace, Love, Liberty Radio, online at fppradio.com. Welcome back to Peace, Love, Liberty Radio, online at fppradio.com. I've been covering the lawsuit out of Arizona challenging Arizona's House Bill 2515, the so-called nude images law, and the fact that it is overly broad in that it criminalizes very innocent things. It criminalizes journalistic things. It even criminalizes purchasing and selling, or purchasing, giving away, possessing things that have, either educational, artistic, or journalistic merit. I'm going through a list of frequently asked questions that the Media Coalition has placed on their website. And the fourth question is, what are some examples of pictures that could be subject to the law? And I gave some examples earlier in the show, and some of these are posted here, and of course I will repeat them. It says, here are some examples of situations that could result in a person going to prison, not just going to jail, but going to prison with a felony conviction. A college professor showing the Napalm Girl photo during a lecture about the Vietnam War. Vendors selling a newspaper that includes images of the abuse of nude prisoners at Abu Ghraib. A photographer showing an editor images he or she took of an unclothed victim of a natural disaster, even if the photo is never published. Retweeting a story that includes photos that Anthony Weiner took of himself. Bookstores or libraries carrying the collection of nude images from renowned photographers like Edward Weston's 125 photographs or Imogene Cunningham on the Bodkey. A person buying, borrowing, or giving one of these books to someone as a gift. Museums showing an exhibit of photos of auctions of slaves that includes photos of women who were not fully clothed, and a woman showing a friend an unsolicited nude photo that she received on her cell phone. Those would all be felonies in Arizona. Question number 5, why is the law unconstitutional? In legal terms, the law is overbroad in the content-based restriction on free speech that criminalizes a substantial amount of material that is fully protected by the First Amendment. It is not narrowly tailored to the state's interest in protecting the privacy of those depicted in the images. Question 6. Is it a serious offense if you break this law? Yes. Anyone who breaks the law could be sentenced to almost 4 years in prison for each image and could be forced to register as a sex offender. A bookseller who is forced to register as a sex offender would also lose his or her business license. Question number 7. And this question right here should make you think. If none of the others have, this one should. What can booksellers and librarians do to comply with the law? The answer given by the Media Coalition is this. A threat of going to prison means every bookseller and librarian is responsible for every book, magazine, newspaper, and video they carry. To follow the law, they would have to review each picture in every book and magazine, which would be an almost impossible task. They would also have to determine whether each picture violates the law without knowing the circumstances surrounding each photograph. Many booksellers and librarians would decline to carry material that includes nude images rather than risk prosecution, even though they have a constitutional right to sell the material. The law also affects their customers and patrons. If booksellers and librarians are forced to remove any material that includes a nude photograph, customers and patrons are denied their right to purchase and borrow such material. That means that you would not be able to purchase an issue of National Geographic at the bookstore, and you won't be able to borrow art books that include nude photographs or nude images from the library. Question number 8, are there any other problems with the law? The answer from the Media Coalition, the law is vague in 3 important ways. There is no definition of consent. It does not explain if the consent stays with the image or with the person depicted in the image. In other words, must consent be obtained each time a picture is published or disseminated? Similarly, the law does not explain if consent can be withdrawn after a photo was published. Also doesn't say whether consent can be withdrawn after it was taken and before it was published. This lack of clarity means a publisher or bookseller cannot rely on consent to be in a picture as consent to distribute the picture. The law makes it clear, or rather, the law makes it a crime to disclose a picture that was published without consent, but does not define what disclose means. The dictionary definition of disclose means to make knowledge of something known to another person. Using this definition, merely posting a link to an article that includes such photos would be illegal. Finally, there is an exception for the law for photos of someone voluntarily in a public setting. The law does not say if this refers to a person who is voluntarily in public or someone who is voluntarily nude in public. Also, it does not define what it means to be in public. Question number 9. And before I continue to question number 9, let me just make sort of an observation here about the last sentence, or actually the last two sentences of the answer to question number 8. It says the law does not say if it refers to a person who is voluntarily in public or someone who is voluntarily nude in public. The distinction there, if it's just someone who is voluntarily in public, then like a peeping Tom that's taking, up the skirt photos of someone could possibly wind up being exempt from this law, unless the law is specifically designed to mean someone who is voluntarily nude in public, in which case the up the skirt photo guy would wind up being in violation of this as well as possibly other laws. Question number 9. Would prosecutors really imprison news photographers, booksellers, librarians, or publishers under a law intended to criminalize revenge porn? The answer, the law's good intention does not remove the risk that a news photographer, bookseller, librarian, or publisher could be unfairly targeted under the law by an overzealous prosecutor. Even if the state assures that the law would not imprison people beyond those who post photos for revenge, it still violates people's First Amendment rights. As Supreme Court Justice John Roberts wrote in a recent First Amendment case, quote, "We would not uphold an unconstitutional statute merely because the government promised to use it responsibly." That being the case of United States v. Stevens from 2010. Question number 10. What's the problem with requiring someone to ask for permission before they publish your photo? Answer. There are many images published without the consent of the person in the photo. In some cases, a person may not want the picture published, but it's not a matter of public importance like the pictures of Anthony Weiner. In other cases, like war or natural disasters, a photographer or publisher may not be able to obtain a person's permission. There's more to this answer, as well as 4 more questions that we'll get to when we come back on Peace, Love, Liberty Radio. Welcome back to Peace, Love, Liberty Radio. Online at fppradio.com. And before I get back to the frequently asked questions on the Media Coalition website about how booksellers, publishers, librarians, journalists, and others can avoid somehow running afoul of the overly broad nude images law, I want to make sure that I tell you about the upcoming Peace, Love, Liberty Radio on the Road tour that will be happening between March 8th and June, I believe it's the 21st or 22nd, basically from the last day of the New Hampshire Liberty Forum until the first day of the Porcupine Freedom Festival. I intend to take Peace, Love, Liberty Radio on the road. I have what I refer to as the Not-A-Bus. It appears from the outside to be one of these short buses that A lot of times, YMCAs will use, or sometimes schools will use them for the shorter buses. But however, it is not a bus. It is being converted into an RV, and I intend to take that on the road, take the message of peace, freedom, love, and liberty on the road. Very similar to what Pete and Ademo and Jason Talley did with both the Motorhome Diaries and Liberty on Tour. I intend to do something very similar. You can find out more about the tour, and you can donate, because the tour can't happen unless the funds are raised, and the funds will be raised by people like you that want to see this take place, and you want to see me visit your town and talk to your Liberty group, or talk to some other Liberty group that happens to be there. I'm hoping to wind up meeting up with some Students for Liberty groups, some Liberty on the Rocks groups, and other similar groups. I also want to see what sort of liberty activism is taking place around the country. So you can find out more about the tour, and you can donate at tour.fppradio.com. That's tour.fppradio.com. So let me get back, because I'd never finished reading the answer to question number 10 in the Media Coalition's list of frequently asked questions. The question is, what's the problem with requiring someone to ask for permission before they publish your photo? The answer from the Media Coalition is there are many images published without the consent of the person in the photo. In some cases, a person may not want the picture published, but it is on a matter of public importance, like the pictures of Anthony Weiner. In other cases, and let me just stop on this for a second, Anthony Weiner took the photos himself and then sent them to one person, and then after that, he didn't consent to all of the other spreading around of the image. He only consented to one distribution. But this bill, the way it's written, is it would possibly apply to a photo that someone later said, I don't want this published anymore. And that could create felons out of people who just share links to where they can find the image. In other cases, like war or natural disasters, a photographer or publisher may not be able to obtain a person's permission, such as the Pulitzer Prize-winning photo of Napalm Girl, which depicts a girl running unclothed as she flees from her village. There are other times when the person depicted in the photograph is unable to give permission, as is the case if the person is deceased. Finally, there are instances where consent may be impossible to prove, such as historic images of indigenous tribes or photos taken by photographers who are now deceased. What is wrong with laws that ban revenge porn is question number 11. And the response from the Media Coalition is states can address the problem of a scorned lover who maliciously posts private images of an ex online, often alongside personal details. There are horror stories about women who have suffered from this harassment. However, this law goes beyond these efforts to humiliate an ex. It isn't limited to photographs disclosed by lovers. It isn't limited to photographs that are published in an attempt to humiliate the person in the photo or to damage his or her personal or professional relationships. This law is not limited to private images taken when the person in the picture had a reasonable expectation of privacy. It doesn't even limit, or rather, it isn't even limited to images where the person in the picture can be identified. Question number 12. If the court rejects this law, is there anything that can be done about someone publishing pictures for revenge? And I think I know where this answer is going based on previous answers, and the Media Coalition responds, there are existing laws that can be used to prosecute revenge porn without violating the First Amendment. Harassment and stalking can be used to prosecute many of the offenders for disrupting the life of the person in the picture or making him or her feel threatened by publishing personal information or encouraging others to contact him or her. There are laws to prosecute anyone who hacks someone's email or internet account to steal these pictures. The most notorious of these revenge porn websites was indicted earlier this year by the federal government for hacking and identity theft. Rather, it was the website owner who was indicted, not the website itself. In another case, a California man who operates one of these websites is being prosecuted for extorting money from people to have their images removed. Peeping Tom laws could be used to prosecute anyone who captures a nude image by spying using technology or in a location we generally assume is private. Taking, posting, or possessing nude photos of anyone under 18 is already illegal under child porn laws if the pictures are sexually oriented. Question number 13, is there anything else a victim can do? The answer is if you take a picture of yourself, a selfie, if you will, you can make a copyright claim to have the photo removed from publication. Under copyright laws, the person who took the picture can make every website remove it. The Arizona law does not apply to websites that host these pictures unless the people who run the site posted it. So Tumblr, Instagram, and other hosting sites cannot be forced to remove the photo under the Arizona law, but they could under federal copyright law. A recent article in the Washington Post explained why copyright law is the best tool to get pictures removed from websites. The victims of revenge porn can also file civil lawsuits against the person who posted their photos. Earlier this year, a Texas woman was awarded $500,000 for emotional distress after her photo was posted on a revenge porn website. In another case, a judge ordered an indefinite lock on a revenge porn website due to a civil lawsuit. And question number 14 that the Media Coalition has on their list of frequently asked questions. Have other states passed revenge porn laws? Yes, other states have passed laws to address this problem, but they are more narrowly focused on malicious disclosures of private images of an ex-lover intended to harass and humiliate the other person. These state laws also exempt images that are newsworthy. Again, this law, being the one in Arizona, what this law does is much broader and does not have these limitations. So I'm sure that more could be said about the Arizona nude images law, but it seems as though everything is pretty much covered by what the ACLU has posted, the 14 frequently asked questions posted by the Media Coalition. There's also a little bit more information on the Freedom to Read Foundation's website about the actual filing of the suit. They have a link to the full text of the complaint where they put up their full complaint, where they list out all of the different things where they find objections to the bill. And if you feel like reading the 31-page complaint, then you can do so. I will post a link to that on the Facebook and the Twitters of Peace, Love, Liberty Radio. And when we come back, I want to talk about some students in Colorado who were protesting not being taught about civil disobedience. Find out more about that when we come back. Welcome back to Peace, Love, Liberty Radio. Online at fppradio.com. So there's a story here out of Colorado that I find oddly amusing, yet disturbing, and just all around weird and strange. And it's really not bringing up the question that I think that should be answered. And the question that I think that should be asked and answered is who should be responsible for deciding what your children learn. Now, on the face of it, that seems like a very simple question. But most people would wind up not answering it the way that I think that people should answer the question. Most people would say, well, the school district or the teachers or some bureaucrat somewhere in Washington. Most people would wind up saying some sort of government-paid employee or some other bureaucrat that influences the government in some way. Well, what is going on in Colorado really winds up pitting the conservatives versus people that they view as progressives. What exactly am I talking about? Well, I'll tell you. The story, again, this is from rawstory.com. On Tuesday of last week, hundreds of high school students in Jefferson County, Colorado, walked out of classes to protest what they deemed as conservative censorship over the National Advanced Placement U.S. History class curriculum. According to the Denver Post, students and teachers are protesting the removal of all mentions of civil disobedience from text and classroom materials, intended for the teaching of advanced placement U.S. history. The Tuesday protest were an extension of a Monday walkout in which 250 students at Evergreen High School in Golden, Colorado, walked out of morning classes to protest at Jefferson County School District headquarters. One student delivered a letter to the school superintendent that said, "I want honesty in my classroom. Teachers want honesty in the classroom." On Tuesday, CBS Denver said approximately 500 students walked out of Arvada West High School and 400 at Arvada High. So that's Arvada West and Arvada High. Approximately 300 students walked out of Golden High School, and about 200 students went to the school offices in connection with the protest. Teachers had staged their own protest the prior week by calling in sick and thereby shutting down 2 area high schools in protest of changes proposed for the history curriculum. Tensions have run high in Jefferson County schools since 3 conservative candidates were elected to the school board. These new board members have suggested an extensive rewrite. They have suggested an extensive rewrite of the way history is taught to the area's students to a model they believe is more patriotic. The right-leaning board members said they believe that history teachers should teach nationalism, respect for authority, and reverence for free markets. They should avoid teaching any historical events or acts that promote, quote, civil discord, social strife, or disregard for the law. Now, real quick, before I continue here, the conservative school board members want to teach reverence for free markets, but I wonder if these conservative school board members would wind up supporting the parents if parents pulled their children out of the public school to seek alternatives of, hey, let's maybe go find some place to teach our kids that the kids will actually learn what the kids want to learn, and it will be in line with what we want them to learn. I obviously can't speak for the conservative Republican members of the school board, but I would guess that they would not support that sort of free market. However, they want their version of free market to be taught. The teachers objected to the proposed politicization of history in the classroom and staged a system-wide sick-out. Now students are following the instructor's lead. The school superintendent said that he would forward the students' letter to the school board and make their concerns known. Yeah, I'm sure he will make the concerns known. And if I had to guess, based on the way most school boards and city councils and governments wind up, making sure, we're making sure that you know that we know your displeasure, they'll take this as informational. They won't actually do anything about it, but they will, they'll have it on the agenda. They'll take it as informational. Well, we put it on the agenda. We tried, kids. That's how the process works. Or maybe I'm being pessimistic here. Maybe the school board actually will wind up changing what they teach the children and I don't even think you could wind up calling high school kids children because, technically, biologically, they're no longer children, but in the eyes of the state, they are. But maybe they will wind up changing what and how they teach these young adults. The story here from Raw Story continues. It says, conservatives around the country oppose the current federal AP history curriculum and exam because they believe that it is biased in favor of a liberal interpretation of history. They complain that AP students are being taught a version of history that turns much of what is accepted as U.S. history on its ear and looks at the country's history of oppression of ethnic minorities and the poor. Oh, you mean they're actually learning what actually happened? That they're actually learning about the genocide of Native Americans conducted by the white settlers? That they're actually learning about the illegal overthrow of the Hawaiian kingdom by the U.S. military and some very influential businessmen in 1893? They're actually learning about the bombs that were being dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And, hey, maybe this was not America's brightest moment in history of the world. You mean they're actually learning that? They're learning to think critically? I haven't read the entire framework put out by the AP people, but I did look at it earlier today. And one of the things that it says in there is we want to teach these students critical thinking. And there's a quote here in just a moment from a retired teacher who says that he's very upset about what is being taught, that they're not teaching the heroism of American soldiers in World War II. They're teaching about how the Japanese Americans were placed in concentration camps and that the bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and that maybe people should reconsider American exceptionalism. Wow. What a thing that people should actually be taught something from a very objective place instead of, the subjective, well, we're America, we're always right. America, F yeah. No, let's teach the kids what actually happened. Let's allow the children or the students to actually come to their own conclusions about whether it was right or whether it was wrong. Tell them, these are the facts. Now, discuss. Do you think it was right? Do you think it was wrong? Why do you think it was right? Why do you think it was wrong? Critical thinking. That's what they should learn in schools. They shouldn't be taught, be a good American, every law is good. That's not what they should be taught. There's more from this as well as the upset retired teacher when we come back on Peace, Love, Liberty Radio. Welcome back to Peace, Love, Liberty Radio. Online at fppradio.com. So the article from Raw Story that I've been reading about the students in Colorado that walked out in protest. Essentially, they committed an act of civil disobedience in protest of not being taught about civil disobedience. The article from Raw Story gets into basically a summary of a story from Newsweek from back in August. So instead of reading the Raw Story summary of the article from Newsweek, I will just read the article from Newsweek. The retired high school teacher Larry Krieger is the person being interviewed, and is pretty much who the story here over at Newsweek is about. It begins by saying, as a high school history teacher for more than 40 years, Larry Krieger felt it was his duty to teach his students what made America great. Before retiring in 2005, Krieger liked to begin his advanced placement U.S. history class each year with the story of John Winthrop, the early Puritan leader who famously called the new colonies a city upon a hill. Krieger explains, it sets the theme of American exceptionalism and the ideals of this country. He believed that the taxpayers of New Jersey, where he spent most of his long teaching career, weren't paying him to be subversive or revisionist. But that's exactly what he was doing if he was only teaching students about, here's all the wonderful things that America did. Pay no attention to the millions that have been killed. Pay no attention. Pay no attention. Then he was being a revisionist. He wasn't teaching what actually happened. He was teaching what he wanted people to know and telling them to ignore all of these other things. So Krieger, the story from Newsweek continues, was horrified last September when he read the new framework for the AP U.S. History course, a course taught to around 500,000 high school juniors every year. It did not mention Winthrop or Thomas Jefferson or even Martin Luther King. Instead, Krieger read the new framework, which takes effect this fall and has already taken effect, as he claims it pushes a revisionist view of American history that elides heroic individuals and emphasizes oppression and conflict. Krieger got angry, then decided to fight back. For months, he's been raising awareness about the new curriculum. He has conservative activists on his side, and just last week, and this, of course, being written in August, he won the official support of the Republican Party, but it doesn't really say what that actually means. Like, the National Republican Party, a state Republican Party, doesn't really say. The article does continue. It says the College Board, which is the nonprofit that administers advanced placement tests, as well as the SAT, designed the new framework to foster critical thinking skills. The lengthy document outlines how the end of the year AP exam, which typically earns well-performing high school students college credits, will test skills such as periodization, contextualization, and comparison, and themes such as identity, work, exchange, and technology, and America in the world. In teaching these new themes and skills, the framework is not meant to exclude any figures or events, but gives teachers the flexibility across 9 different periods of U.S. history to teach topics of their choice in depth. On its website, the College Board stresses that it revised the AP U.S. History framework based on input from thousands of teachers. The website says, quote, the teachers and professors participating in the AP U.S. History program expressed strong concerns that the course requires a breathless race through American history, preventing teachers and students from examining topics of local interest in depth and sacrificing opportunities for students to engage in writing and research. But Krieger is convinced that the fact that the framework fails to mention most of America's greatest historical figures by name means that they won't be on the test and therefore will not be taught. And he's aghast that events and themes he always considered part of America's greatness appear in the framework as not so great. Krieger said in a conference call sponsored by a couple of conservative groups that were fighting against the new AP U.S. History framework, quote, "As I read through the document, I saw a consistently negative view of American history that highlights oppressors and exploiters." He then read a quote from the framework to illustrate his point. Quote, "Instead of striving to build a city on a hill, according to the framework our nation's founders are portrayed as bigots who developed a belief in white superiority." That's a quote that was in turn derived from a strong belief in British racial and cultural superiority, and that, of course, led to the creation of a rigid racial hierarchy. And to sort of expound on this just a bit, because, again, I did read parts of the AP U.S. History framework, and one of the things that it points out is that in the British colonies, that being for the most part the U.S., Canada, and some others in North America, for the most part, the British colonists did not intermarry with the indigenous peoples. Instead, they viewed the indigenous peoples in a lot of ways as enemies, as opposed to the Spanish and Portuguese colonies, where the people that were doing the colonizing, they did intermarry with the indigenous peoples, and they created a new sort of cultural identity. There wasn't this us versus them mentality in those colonies as much as in the British colonies, because they were intermarrying and they were creating their new cultural identity, whereas in the British colonies, again, there wasn't really that intermarriage. Sure, there was a little bit, but it wasn't as widespread as in the Spanish and Portuguese colonies. And that is what is being referenced here in the, quote, strong belief in British racial and cultural superiority. Because, you know, the whole thing about manifest destiny, America is supposed to take over the whole continent from sea to shining sea. That was basically a racial superiority motive of we're better than the Native Americans, we're going to take all their land, ha 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 ha. And to deny that that was some sort of, you know, cultural superiority thing is to deny history. There's more on this when we come back on Peace, Love, Liberty Radio. Welcome back to Peace, Love, Liberty Radio. Online at fppradio.com. Now, I'll get back to the story here about why conservatives are really upset about high school students not learning about why America's the greatest place in the world, despite the fact that all kinds of studies show that America is not the greatest country in the world. I'll get back to that in just a moment. But first, I want to make sure that I tell you about Roberts and Roberts Brokerage. For over 35 years, Roberts and Roberts Brokerage has been a trusted source for buying and selling your investment-grade precious metals. They now take Bitcoin for purchasing precious metals, which means that you can turn some of your profits into a long-term investment. Call Roberts and Roberts Brokerage for knowledgeable advice on investing, and let them know that Darryl sent you. 800-874-9760. That's 800-874-9760. So the story here is from Newsweek, from an article published back in August, where retired teacher Larry Krieger apparently has gotten his panties in a wad over the fact that high school students who are taking the advanced placement U.S. history class are being taught critical thinking skills, and they're not having America's greatness shoved down their throat. They're not being taught to be good little citizens. In his words, they are being taught that America did some bad things, and therefore America's bad, and, maybe you should question America. So this has him upset because he thinks that, only, America should wind up being taught. America's number one. Yeah, America. That's what he thinks should be taught. The story continues. It says, perhaps most dispiriting to Krieger was the framework's treatment of World War II. And this is something, World War II is something that gets conservatives all up in a tizzy, because they want to think that, America can never do any wrong, and killing Japanese people, well, that was the greatest thing that ever happened. That was better than the creation of sliced bread. America killing millions of people with nuclear weapons was the greatest thing ever, according to some conservatives. Krieger says, quote, there's no discussion whatsoever of the valor or heroism of America's soldiers. He then quoted the framework that says, wartime experiences, such as the internment of Japanese Americans, challenges to civil liberties, debates over race and segregation, and the decision to drop the atomic bomb raised questions about American values. That is what the high school students are learning about World War II. They're being taught what actually happened. They're not being taught this great fictitious fairy tale about, Adolf Hitler was going to kill everybody in the world, and then America came along, and America dropped nuclear bombs on Japan, and then Adolf Hitler killed himself. It's not all unicorns and candy canes and America F yeah. The U.S. government over the years has done some really, really, really horrible things. That's the truth. The article here continues. It says, angry over the new guidelines, Krieger turned to the internet, where he came across a YouTube video of a conservative education activist and attorney, Jane Robbins, who is working to stop the adoption of the Common Core educational standard across the country. He reached out to her in November of last year, and by spring, the two had become a team, drafting an open letter to the college board. And as of August, it had over 1,100 signatures. They also published op-eds on conservative news websites opposing the new curriculum. The group led by Robbins is called the American Principles Project, and the conservative Christian group Concerned Women for America. They have taken up the cause and sponsored the conference call that was previously mentioned. Their cause has also adopted, or rather has been adopted by the National Association of Scholars, which pushes against multiculturalism in higher education. The group's president, Peter Wood, called the framework politically biased. One of his many complaints is about immigration, where the AP U.S. History framework sees new migrants supplying the economy with an important labor force. Others, with equal justification, see the rapid growth of a population that displaces native-born workers from low-wage jobs and who are also heavily dependent on public services and transfer payments. So basically, they want to push a xenophobic view of society instead of, the reality that when people and goods don't cross borders, armies will. Krieger and Robbins' work got its biggest boost in early August when the Republican National Committee adopted a resolution calling the new framework a radically revisionist view of American history. The resolution, drafted largely by Robbins, urged the College Board to delay implementation until a new framework could be drawn up and called on Congress to investigate the framework and withhold federal funding from the College Board until the framework was changed. The RNC approved the resolution unanimously. The article here continues. Conservative activists fear losing local control over what is taught in schools, particularly when it comes to the meaning of American history. In interviews, they expressed an uneasiness with a view of history that examines groups rather than focusing on heroic individuals. While they decried the fact that civil rights figures like Dr. Martin Luther King were not explicitly named in the framework, they could have done without the mention of leftist groups that defined the 1960s, like the Students for a Democratic Society and the Black Panthers. They also disagreed with the College Board over how students should learn, with Krieger and his allies preferring a curriculum based on memorizing facts to be one, or rather, they prefer memorizing facts over critical thinking. Even before the new framework, it's clear that conservatives disagree with how history is taught in colleges, part of a general mistrust of American universities as a bastion of liberal ideas. As Wood of the Conservative Scholars Group wrote in his AP U.S. History Assessment, quote, when the College Board says it is modifying AP U.S. History to make it like a comparable college course, I regret to say that is probably true. Meaning that they don't want high school students to actually learn critical thinking skills. They want them to just have stuff shoved into their brain. George Washington was the greatest man ever. George Washington did not actually call up the militia to go try to collect taxes on Americans after he fought against taxes. George Washington could do no wrong. George Washington chopped down a cherry tree. Abe Lincoln was the next greatest president ever. Abe Lincoln could do no wrong. That's what these conservatives want taught. They don't want the students to actually learn the truth about what happened. They don't want students to learn that the Whiskey Rebellion was actually a good thing, that the U.S. Constitution, as it is, currently being implemented, is a horrible, horrible, flawed document. They don't want students to think about, hey, maybe we could do things without the government. Although, of course, the liberals, they don't want students to think about maybe we could do without government. But it goes down to the question that I asked before I actually read the story about the students in Colorado walking out of their class in protest. Who should be responsible for deciding what your children learn? And on both sides of this, it seems as though the answer is bureaucrats. A bureaucrat somewhere at some level should decide what is being taught. The conservatives, they want their preferred bureaucrats making the decisions. The liberals or progressives, whatever you want to call them, they want their preferred bureaucrats making the decisions. But no one in this entire debate is saying, hey, maybe bureaucrats shouldn't be deciding. Maybe it should be a joint decision between the parents and the students. Maybe they should be responsible. There's more. Welcome back to Peace, Love, Liberty Radio. Online at fppradio.com. So for anyone that is interested, I have posted the link to the AP U.S. History Practice Exam. You can peruse that at your leisure and see if you think that it is, somehow teaching children or teaching people that America is not the greatest country ever, that it's, somehow teaching them to question things, or if you think that somehow, it is appropriate and that it needs to, just stay how it is. I'm looking over some of this, and I don't see anything in the test so far. And, of course, I've only been looking at it for about 2.5 minutes, but I don't see, I've done a Google search, Control F, and tried finding certain words in here, and I don't see anything that is overly horrible. It doesn't say that, like the word nuclear appears once. And it's in a question of which of the following best represents continuity in the years after 1945 with the ideas that Roosevelt expressed in the excerpt. And, of course, I've got an excerpt of a quote. And the answer options are the conviction and execution of suspected Soviet spies in the U.S., U.S. membership in an international peacekeeping body, the U.S. military commitment to countries battling communist insurgencies, or the rise of peace organizations opposed to the buildup and use of nuclear weapons. That's the only use anywhere in this test of the word nuclear. So to somehow say that, well, it doesn't sufficiently tell children how great America is, and it tells them that nuking Japan was wrong, that's not actually what it says. The framework says that, the nuking of Japan caused people to question American values, but that's nowhere in the test. So again, it's one of those things to where the conservatives, they want to only teach nationalism, and they view anything else as somehow un-American. But as one of the protest signs that was being held by one of the students in Colorado said, protest is the greatest form of patriotism. So let's talk about something else in this last segment, shall we? Catalonia. What about Catalonia? Well, apparently the president of the Catalonia region of Spain signed a decree calling for an independence referendum on November 9th that puts him on a collision course with the central government, which says that such a vote would be illegal. The wealthy northeastern region of Spain, which accounts for around 1/5 of the Spanish economy, has its own language and distinct culture, and has long fought for self-rule. A large majority of Catalans want to hold a referendum on independence, and the region's president, Artur Mas, signed the decree in a ceremony in the Catalan government offices in Barcelona. The Gothic, I'm not even going to try to pronounce the name of the palace, but he was in the offices in a Gothic palace that was surrounded, and he was surrounded by government and political allies in his campaign for independence. Mas said in a speech in Catalan, Spanish, and English after the signing ceremony, Catalonia wants to speak, wants to be heard, wants to vote. Now is the right time, and we have the right legal framework to do so. However, the Spanish national government has vowed to block such a referendum. On Friday, the Spanish deputy prime minister, that being one full day before the decree was signed, the Spanish deputy prime minister said that the cabinet would meet on Monday to formalize the appeal against the vote. The objection would then be handed to the Constitutional Court, suspending the vote until a final ruling on its legality, which could take years. Spain's central government says a Catalan independence referendum would violate the country's 1978 constitution, drawn up on Spain's transition to democracy. Political analysts expect the Catalan leader to call early elections after Madrid blocks the vote. He would then use the election as a way to give Catalans a chance to vote on independence from Spain. Mas is under pressure from separatist coalition partners to go ahead with the referendum, even if it is declared illegal by the Spanish government, although he has said that he would not do anything to violate the Spanish law. The Spanish government also refuses to allow a vote, and that has angered Catalans, even those who favor a continued union with Spain. Let me read that one more time. Even people who want to remain part of Spain are upset about the fact that Catalonia is possibly not going to wind up getting to vote on independence. Hundreds of thousands of people marched in the streets of Barcelona earlier this month for the right to hold a referendum. Now, why exactly is Catalonia important? Well, for years, there has been the secessionist movement in Catalonia, and a lot of people thought for a while that Catalonia would wind up getting to vote for independence before Scotland ever got the chance to vote. But, of course, as we know, Scotland had their vote a couple of weeks ago, and the results wound up being somewhat surprising, 45%. And, again, this is if you believe the official results. 45% of voters in Scotland voted for independence, and 55% voted against. But there's allegations that vote fraud happened and that it wasn't a fair vote and other things, and maybe a majority of people in Scotland voted for independence, but as they say, the world may never know. There's a story here from the Wall Street Journal that goes a little more in depth about who would be eligible to vote and exactly what it would mean for Catalonia. Catalonia's government outlined an $11.4 million plan, a €9 million plan, to poll the wealthy region's 5.4 million voters in a non-binding referendum on independence, even as Spain's prime minister plans to hold an emergency cabinet meeting to launch a lawsuit aimed at blocking the vote. Now, here's my question before I continue any further. Why would the Spanish government try to prevent a non-binding referendum? The whole purpose of a non-binding referendum is that it doesn't wind up causing anything to happen necessarily. Of course, it would wind up showing the Spanish government how many people in Catalonia don't want to be part of Spain. But other than that, I don't see why they would wind up wanting to postpone or just outright not allow this to happen. The article here from the Wall Street Journal continues, tensions between Barcelona and Madrid rose sharply Saturday after Catalan leader Artur Mas signed a decree formally convoking a November 9th referendum, defying warnings by Prime Minister Mariano Rajoy that the vote would be unconstitutional. The Secretary General of Spain's governing Popular Party said that Mas had committed a political suicide and was irresponsible, and that the act was designed to cover up incompetence. Earlier today, Catalan Vice President Joana Ortega said the planned referendum was legal, constitutional, and statutory, and that the regional government would proceed on the assumption that the courts don't block it. She said that the authorities were preparing more than 10,000 ballot boxes and 6 million ballots. Now, here is who would be able to vote. Catalans age 16 and over would be eligible, and the government unveiled an informational website with the slogan, "Remember you have an appointment on November 9th, you decide." A big electronic clock was installed in downtown Barcelona over the weekend, counting down the days and the hours until the opening of the polls. In Madrid, the Council of State, the central government's highest advisory body, met to review a legal strategy to block Catalan referendum, and, of course, it will wind up going to the Constitutional Court. So this is something I'll keep my eyes on in the coming weeks and months. And, of course, you can keep your ears on this by tuning in every week to Peace, Love, Liberty Radio. Again, online at fppradio.com. That's where you can find all of the archives and so much more. Tune in again next week.